Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining us for this morning's panel. This is PQ Talks. We're here to talk about the practices of contemporary scenography, the way we make it, and also the way we think about it. We've had a lot of wonderful discussions over the past several days, and I think one of the things that has become clear out of those is that there is no one scenography and there is no one theory of scenography. There are different ways of making things and different way of. And so I do have the immense pleasure to welcome a group of Czech experts here to talk about their work, their project that is concerning the Prague Czech School of Thought, of Structuralist Thought, and how it relates to scenography. So let me welcome here first Šárka Havlíčková-Kisová, who is a theater scholar, theater historian, also associate professor at the Department of Theater Studies at Masaryk University in Brno. To her right is David Drozd, who's a dramaturg, also a theater historian and theorist, and the chair of the Department of Theater Studies at Masaryk University in Brno. And here, a face that you may be familiar with, Pavel Drábek, who is theater maker, translator, historian, theorist, also professor at the University of Halle. So please join me in giving warm welcome to our panelists.
Before I hand over to David, who is the official moderator, just a little bit of the background. What we are going to talk about is an outcome of about 15 years of work. And we are looking into something that we find extremely fascinating, extremely interesting. Traditionally, theory and practice in some disciplines has been kept apart. Whereas what we are going to look at, what we call Prague School of Thought, it was a collective of people who were practitioners and theorists at the same time. And there was no borderline between them. You'll recognize some of the names because some of the names are the key figures in 20th century thought philosophy. But also what we would like to argue in this, or trace in our panel, is that logic that started in the 1920s in artistic practice through the 1930s as theory and experimentation with media, with multimedia in the 1930s, then developed into post-war practice that then set up what became Prague Quadrennial as a very inclusive, open festival of scenography that brings together practitioners but also thinkers. Now we have a PowerPoint presentation. David will go through it, but it's rough. We'll be taking turns, but occasionally when we can't hold it any longer, we will run into one another's speeches. So over to David.
Yeah, so I will take it over for the moment. The idea is that this was a shared project, or is shared project, so we will really be taking parts. And I will start with a bit of history and a bit of reading, the most heavy thing for the beginning. What we will be referring to are, in fact, two books. One already exists for 5 years, or more than 5 years already. Oh, well, that's, yeah. These two books are quite complementary. The idea is that we have been translating and editing book of Prague School writings on theater, and there is like quarter of the book is dedicated to scenography, stage space, dramatic space, and issues we will be discussing. So this is one like background. So this is like product placement a bit, and invitation. The invitation is we are just about to finish another book by Otakar Zich, by only one writer, Aesthetics of the Dramatic Art, which is being translated right now, or finished translation is being editing. And the idea, the funny thing is that the first book deals with older texts, because Prague, a theater theory reader, deals with the text from 30s and 40s mainly, or sometimes 70s. So let's say Prague, functional, semiotic, structural approach. while Otakar Zich was slightly before. It was originally published in 1931, and he is kind of precursor of this school. But our idea is that these two books should be ideally complementary reading for theater practitioners and theorists, historians. Why this is so important, just let us introduce Otakar Zich. What Pavel was mentioning is evident in Zich's life. He was aesthetician, as well, what else he could be at the time. He was opera critic, but also opera composer. So he was very much connected also with theater practice as reviewer and as practical artist, for example, also as musician. So he shared something which is maybe sometimes not that common, that he really could have quite an insight into practical arts in the way how music composer thinks, actor thinks. He was connected with practical artists, and at the same time he was really a philosopher or aesthetician per se. And from this overview, it's up there, you could see how it's like mingling, how he really, if you do the complete bibliography, it's very scholarly on one hand, but on the other hand, it has, well, three operas are three operas. Well, they are not performed anymore nowadays, but they have been respected in the time he composed them. So definitely we shouldn't call him only a scholar. Aesthetic of the dramatic art as his final work is really like a crown of his opus. It was his dream to create systematic aesthetic of all arts. And happily for us, he started with writing about theater, or dramatic art as he called it, and this is the only volume he finished in his life. He had real vision to do all the arts, but we have only this. And aesthetics of dramatic art is really a fundamental cornerstone of Czech theater theory. The concepts he established and which we are trying to introduce in English by these, you see the crucial concepts, in the time he is doing it, are quite unique. Today we speak about Zich as pre-semiotician or somebody who is opening up for semiotic concepts, but at the same time he was very much connected with phenomenology, with psychology of art. Šárka, as a cognitivist, not only a theater historian and theoretician, but also cognitivist theoretician, is arguing nowadays that in Zich we can read even cognitivist theory. So he is the book is extremely complex. And it works as some kind of, I would say, sum up of early modern attempts of theater. When you read Zich, you have the feeling like he was reading Craig and Appia and referring to Max Reinhardt and Stanislavski, all these early modernistic attempts to do theater. He is evidently aware of them very much, but what he is providing is like self-reflecting or back-reflection of the theoretical concepts, because, well, the point is he's not quoting anybody. So I'm the one who is all the time like tracing down what probably might have been Zich aware of. And what he is doing are analytical concepts, and this is what we, I think, still can work on in international, well, in local context it works perfectly, because Zich is like the starting book for all the students of theater and theater practice. First concept is quite evident, but not obvious at Zich times. He's doing very strict distinction between actor as physical person, dramatic persona as something fictitious, which is created by what we call actor figure. This is our new translation or attempt to call what is the thing actor is creating from himself. What we see on stage, there were like 10 different versions how to translate this strange term, like actor's figure, stage figure. We opted for actor figure. So this is one distinction. The other very strong, valid for until today, it's very strict distinction between scenic space as something which is on stage, created by, well, Zich wouldn't say scenographer, because this was not the position which existed at that time. He would call just about like designer maybe, and dramatic space as the fictional space And for Zich, and this is the most interesting thing, which is including lines of force and fields of force, Zich started thinking about dramatic space not only about like as a space, like where the action takes place, but he was probably one of the first, hand to hand with Appia and Craig maybe a bit, maybe Sergei Eisenstein a bit, understand space as crucial metaphor for drama as such. So he is saying that every character in the play is like force node, is working with energy. So relations in between characters are lines of force in space which could materialize in the way how stage design is organized, or stage design can help materialize these relations. So his notion of space, even though he is very much connected with, let's say, like realistic theater, more or less, he already feels this like movement to energy metaphor in the space. So when he says dramatic space is field of force, he already understanding this fictional space as much more complex than just a spatial organization. And this is something which still, I think, works and could be developed until today's. It could be still extremely inspirative. And I think it takes like inspiration for both sources. On one hand, from Zich, very strong ability to be theoretician and think in a very abstract way. He was partly a mathematician, and I think it's somewhere like in the way he's thinking. But at the same time, with his experience with live art as such, with practical live art. So this is one person we will be referring to. Just to the other, it is just like one generation, was Prague Linguistic Circle, which was very much connected with theater practice. And if Zich was one, and artist and theoretician in one, Prague Linguistic Circle worked really as a laboratory of exchange. There are many theoretical texts about avant-garde theater in Czech context in 30s and 40s, and we are always arguing if it works the way that theoreticians first write the visions and then the artists try out, or the other way around. And it's very often difficult to see in which way the influence goes. So I would rather argue that it's really like mutual dialogue, because members of Prague Linguistic Circle, which initially was started as really very serious linguistic scientific group, there were artists starting first from poetry writers, then painters, then theater directors. So the idea was that structural approach, functional structural approach to theater, very analytical approach, is definitely something which helps avant-garde theater to become aware of its own principles and the other way around. So I think the Prague structural theory really could not exist with the theater, which was going like hand in hand and at the same time. So, and just to give you a bit of feeling, this is just, I won't be analyzing the photos, just to bring you back years and years. Yeah, almost 100 years, sounds terrible. Almost 100 years to beginnings of Czech avant-garde theater, just two photos from two very representative performances of so-called liberated theater, which was the avant-garde, the first avant-garde scene in Czech context, founded in 1925. Just from the photos, you could see how up-to-date the design was, because what we see here is very strong geometric stylization, fragments of like constructivistic stage. So this was something, if you would be reading something from Prague School from 30s, this is what they have been seeing on stage. This is what inspired them in thinking about theater. And of course, Jiří Frejka as director and Jindřich Honzl as also director, they are also both theoreticians. So if you have the Prague School theory reader, we have also their text included in the volume. And Pavel will be going to speak about them very soon, because now it comes to concept, so it's his part. Yes?
Thank you very much, David. David showed some images, and there was something to watch. I'll be doing the boring second movement before we have some more images from Šárka. And I would like to revisit some of the key points that David introduced. And these are fascinating adventures. David mentioned Zich's what we call the actor triad, the fact that we have an actor as a physical person. The actor is not creating fiction. The actor is using their body, their expression, their movement, their working in time, their mimic expression to portray or create the stage figure. That is something that we as audiences can perceive through our senses, that we empathize with it, we relate it to our experience of appropriate behaviors, but the actor on stage, Zich argues, is not creating fiction. They are creating a stage persona. That is their creative work. That creative work is perceived by us as audience. We look at the actor and we imagine what that means in that fictional world. And I think that crucial distinction between the imaginary, which happens, which is the product of us as spectators, on the basis of what is happening in the physical, psychological, or if you want, phenomenological space that the actor and the others on stage are creating, is very crucial. A couple of days ago, we had a panel. Perhaps some of you were here about pedagogies or the different schools of scenography, and one of the speakers made a distinction about performance spaces as the difference between hosting and ghosting. So the host is what we are creating actively. So we structure a space, we set up a scene, we set up a venue to host an event. And that event can be fictional, it can be real, but everyone brings in their imagination. And if there is a fiction created or some kind of social action, this is what is called ghosting in that theory. And it's a very interesting distinction between the perceived and the imaginary. And Zich is very well attuned towards these distinctions. So he says the actor, and it can be, for instance, Helen Mirren. We know that Helen Mirren is in front of us. We are watching Helen Mirren perform. And what is her creative work? Well, she's performing the actions of, I don't know, Cleopatra. And of course, Helen Mirren is using her body, her expression, her voice, her modes of expression to create that stage figure. We as critical viewers will say, okay, this is Helen Mirren doing another wonderful job. But we are very well aware that this is an actor doing creative work, while at the same time, and that's the ghosting element, we live in a fictitious, imaginary world of dramatic persona, or the dramatic fiction. And this is very simple, but Zich in 1931 makes this very simple distinction, which I would say is crucial for understanding or analyzing very critically our modes of perception, or understanding of performance, but also appreciating the creative work of an actor. Now he extends this to the space as well. So of course there is a stage, and by stage we should speak about performance space, a space where performance is happening. Now that performance space, by virtue of action, by virtue of the energy that actors put in and that we perceive, becomes the scene, or if you want, the imaginary stage or imaginary action. So while we can watch a few planks in front of us, we know that this is, for instance, Denmark, or that this is playing Chekhov's Village somewhere in the middle of Russia. And we are aware of that distinction between what we see with our eyes, perceive with our senses, and what we imagine in our head. And that kind of borderline between the craft work, the craft of making and our perception is crucial. So the distinction between space and scene being the image that is created, so that's the kind of physical thing corresponding to the stage figure of the triad, is crucial, and then we as audiences perceive and understand. And Zich argues that the action, that is the drama, that means the drama, the theater, is not what is happening on stage. It is actually what is happening in us through our empathy, through our imagination. So we perceive it. And of course, we perceive it not only as individuals, but we perceive it as a community. We perceive it as members of bigger units. And it's a very refined theory that is profoundly rooted in the moment that we are perceiving. So he speaks about action. Now, when he speaks about drama, I think this is an important point. What does he mean by drama? Zich is very particular to say that, yes, there are traditions of staging texts. However, a text belongs to literature, he argues. And it is only one of the components, and he argues very vehemently against perceiving theatre as producing, staging dramatic texts. While this is the predominant mode of theatre, and he believes that it's a supreme mode of theatre, he refuses the notion that theatre or act or performance is just the staging of dramatic texts written by someone else. He says these are just components. So what he is actually looking at doing is perceiving drama or theatre as what he calls the art of human interaction. Okay, that for him is the definition of theatre, human interaction. And if we think back to what David said about the lines of force and the field of force, or if you want, field of energy, as what happens in action, we out of a sudden have a theory that does not distinguish between theatre and performance. And we, as we have been thinking about it, that's probably one of the reasons why, for instance, in Czech environment, there is no clear distinction between theatre art and performance art, because the two conceptually, since Zich, have been moving hand in hand. So there are performances that start with a text and that stage texts, but also performance is profoundly rooted, as Zich says, in the material. And every supreme artist, says Zich, thinks through their material. Now, I will move a little bit further towards metaphor and function, because these are crucial words that Zich himself doesn't speak about, but the theorists of Prague School do. So what follows, I have 9 slides with quotations that I would like to go through from the 3 leading figures: Jan Mukařovský, who was a theorist, but who was a great friend also of Roman Jakobson, who developed a lot of Zich's theories. Then Jindřich Honzl. David mentioned Honzl. Honzl was not only a theorist who studied psychology, but he was the leading Czech avant-garde stage director, but also film director. So in the 1920s, 1930s, we hear he's a supreme performer, theatre maker and filmmaker who's also setting up theories. And the third figure is Emil František Burian. Burian is a remarkable figure, incredible figure. He started as a composer, and he wrote several avant-garde, very crazy operas before realizing, I want to be a director. And in the 1920s and 30s, he became a theatre director and set up his own theatre that was closed because he was Jewish. He was then deported to several concentration camps and miraculously survived and returned. But he, in the 1930s, his experiments with the theatre and with performance were probably the most fascinating moments of combining practice, music, multimedia, and theory. So these are the three thinkers we're going to look at to explore some of these key concepts. So Mukařovský speaks about the internal dynamism, so that is the movement within the theatre, and he claims that the essence of theatre is a changing stream. So notice then those metaphors of movement, nothing static. They don't speak about static images. When it comes to static images, such as a set, they say that's visual arts, that's architecture, that's not theatre. Theatre is a stream, it's a movement, it is happening. A changing stream of non-material and constantly regrouping relations. And now notice how that dynamism, the constantly regrouping, is crucial. Not only is the development from period to period, so historically, from director to director, from one school of acting to another built on this, but also so is every individual stage performance. So everything that happens in performance is a constant shift between individual aspects. Within a stage performance, components also confront and counterbalance one another in constant mutual tension born along stage time. So they're looking at the time on stage and how, for instance, light and sound and acting and the space and the costume, how they counterbalance one another and are in interaction. They say that's the essence of drama. That is the essence, not some kind of static idea, preconceived concept. Everything, not just moving action, but also an apparently motionless pause, sinks into the flow of this time, says Mukařovský on current state of theatre. So I would like to emphasize how theatre or performance is not perceived as static, as images, as designs, as we would call them, but rather as flow, stream, and constant interaction. And notice how the shifting nature and dynamic nature is the starting point. So it's the movement, is the interchange of energies between artists, and their creative work, how that becomes the core. Mukařovský continues on space, and he develops Zich's concept, and he says the dramatic space is not identical with the stage, okay? And not all with three-dimensional space, for it originates in time. So again, dramatic space, because it's based on action, that means what we do, how we behave, what is happening is crucially rooted in time through the gradual changes in spatial relationships. So it is the changes that are the core of action. It is not some kind of preconceived static point. So changes in the spatial relationship between the actor and the stage and between the actors themselves. And notice how aware these theorists from Zich to Mukařovský and others are to the space in which it happens. That's way before any concept of scenography emerged. But we argue in this panel that this is really the core of, or the philosophy, the understanding of action, space, that sets the groundwork for, I would say, how perhaps now we perceive theatre. A short note. When Zich speaks about space, he says that we perceive space through touch. So how we are able to reach or not reach. He said that our spatial perception is predicated upon our sense of touch. And that's a fantastic observation. And I was reminded of it so many times during this year's PQ. I don't know if you can compare this PQ with the previous ones. This PQ is incredibly tactile. It requires you to touch, to be there, to sense it, not just to look at it, not just to listen to it, but it requires you to engage in a multisensory way. And I would say that they had anticipated some of that theoretically by highlighting that it is not only audiovisual, it is multisensory, and touch is how we perceive space. So, owing to its energy, that means the energy of the dramatic space can extend beyond the stage in all directions. This gives rise to the phenomenon referred to as the imaginary space. So, one example that is not given by Mukařovský but by Honzl. If we are talking about a dramatic space, they give an example of the cherry orchard, where towards the end of cherry orchard, we only hear the sounds of the axes falling on the trees, chopping them down. And of course, that is the dramatic space, which is not on the stage. It is perfectly our imagination. But it is through the virtue of that sound that we are transported and that the action takes place by metaphor in our imagination. Or the use of light to convey the action. So that's their perception of dramatic space. And notice again, we are not talking about dramatic space as something that is crafted, but it's an interchange, it's an interaction of all the components, whether human, non-human, material, immaterial, and it unrolls over time, the fourth dimension. Jindřich Honzl, on the dramatic quality of space, continues, and he says, the stage is not an image. Let the stage depict or represent perhaps nothing before the start of the performance. So notice, he almost anticipates in 1933 the notion of the empty space, of the empty stage. Let it perhaps be a neutral place, for theatricality lies in action, in becoming. And someone about 4 days ago in PQ Talks spoke about the importance of becoming as a crucial dramatic quality. This is where we have Honzl in 1933 writing about theatricality that lies in action, in becoming. Let the stage be a place of dramatic and poetic thinking. By poetic is not only poetry, but also the act of making. So dramatic and poetic thinking. Poetic thinking is thinking in metaphors. So everything that is on stage, can carry something. It can carry some meaning if we use it in this way. If I use this as a telescope, it will become a telescope. It will become a metaphor of telescope. So of course, it's a very insignificant persona here, or figure, but you can imagine if you put it to an appropriate action. So by metaphor, poetic thinking is thinking in metaphors. Let the technical engineers, that's what we would probably call scenographers now. Let the technical engineers create poems in space and transform the stage through metaphors. And by metaphor, we don't mean the kind of literary notion of metaphor, but objects and vehicles that carry meanings, that take us from the physical space to the dramatic space. The theatrical emotional quality of the stage. Now, this is important. Notice how much there is how emphasis on emotion, on senses, on feeling. The theatrical emotional quality of the stage and its dramaticality or dramatic qualities are similar to the fear and joy children experience when faced with unfamiliar things or places. And I find it fascinating how Honzl comes back to the notion of play when you are talking about theater and related back to the fear and expectations and not of the unknown, that we are curious and by the scintillation of what we see in front of us. Now, Honzl highlights, pun unintended, the importance of light. And he says light, which is the fourth dimension of space, of stage poetry in space, is the most mobile and therefore the most theatrical of all material elements. Someone a couple of days ago said repeated the truism that there is no space without light. And notice that again we are talking about the dramatic qualities of action, but the space and light are crucial. And he says, and he goes into kind of arguing why light is so important. Observe throngs gathered to watch fireworks. Recall how signal fires have galvanized armies and crowds, the invasive force of neon signs affecting even the most apathetic passerby in the city streets, the invasion of light, reflection, refractions, mirroring, and finally, film. And he's writing in 1933, at the point where first experiments with combining film, or what we would now call projection, digital projection, with and creative uses of light were taking place in the theatre. And let all these dimensions be dramatized. Let's dramatize them and let's theatricalize them by constant movement, by the succession of changes and that is the performance, the drama, the poem. Burian, the opera composer turned avant-garde director, looks at the new theatre of art, and I would like to highlight he is thinking of it not as visual, audiovisual, but as visceral, connected to muscles. And what is a muscle? He asks. Matter in rhythmic motion. And when he talks about actors' motion, he thinks of it as muscles, as embodied, visceral qualities. That's how we create action. That's how we create space. If a muscle moves in direct response to light, this means that three elements are cooperating rhythmically in space: sculpture, painting, and music. And I can notion how the interaction, interconnections between different components, light, movement, and rhythm are in place here. But this muscle is alive. It has its center in the heart and brain of a person. And we can what Jindra later called the psychoplastic space that Josef Svoboda took over. This is thinking through space, through psychology, through the heart, through the muscles of the human in that space. Through the movement of his muscles, the person actor mimes either the state of his body or the situation in which he came to this state. That's how he explains action. So what we do if, for instance, Helen Mirren plays Cleopatra, she is using her body to mime the state into which her character came into that situation, into that position. That's a totally different conception of performance, which is profoundly spatial, profoundly dynamic. And we are looking at 1930s. Through the movement of his muscles, the totality of states and the totality of situations, if not left to chance, is the best image of theatrical poetry, which is based on the construction created by these elements. All these components move rhythmically in time and space, so their connection to music is incontestable. And that's fascinating because we have Burian, who was an opera composer, and Zich, who was an opera composer, who perceived theatre as a temporal art, as something that happens in time and place, with all the components being orchestrated almost like a score. And Burian continues. The components of the classical arts partaking in the construction of the new aesthetics theatrical form are being joined by new contemporary components such as film and slide projection, radio music, sound montage, new devices and new musical instruments, electronic music. In 36, it's anticipating the use of all the kind of multimedia that we are talking now, and not only anticipating, but actually practicing. David will be talking about it in a minute. However, none of these exist without mutual dependence. All of them come together in a kind of dynamic dialogue. Everything is intimately connected, guided by the laws of music, regarding rhythm and dynamics, homophony, polyphony, harmony and discord. The stage architect, we would call the scenographer, has at his disposal is no longer the elusive space of the old stages. We are not talking about illusion. We are creating a space, a dramatic space that is thinking through its material and through its media. And that's fascinating, I would say a revolutionary idea that happens here. And I would say this is what anticipates perhaps our very inclusive, very open, very diverse ways of thinking about scenography. Burian talks also about the stage metaphor. And he says, give us a short anecdote. The old opera composers composed chromatic stage storms for the strings, lightning for the piccolo, and thunder for the timpani. An obvious metaphor would emerge from this example if the orchestra was playing from the speakers in the auditorium. And there were several projection screens placed on stage showing enlarged raindrops falling towards the audience. The stage would be covered in silver mesh, reflected by the mirrors into the audience. The rhythm of the whole stage picture would have to correspond with the rhythm and the color of the orchestra. The audience would probably run away in fear that they will get wet or stricken by lightning. Honzl says, examples to illustrate the special character of theatrical sign, and by sign we are not talking about semiotics. This is way before semiotics, so let's not be very pedantic about the word concept of sign. In 1941, whereby it changes its material, so the sign changes its material and passes from one aspect to another, animates an inanimate thing, shifts from an acoustical aspect to a visual one. So, for instance, we hear the crack of a lightning, and of course, through our experience, we automatically imagine that the lightning will be coming. And if some kind of action happens on the stage, we say, okay, this is the lighting, this is the metaphor for that lighting. And so on. We have already stated that in the theatre it is not possible to decide once and for all, and in every case, that what is normally called the acting will not be entrusted to the scenery. So he's speaking about acting being partly a scenographic thing, that it can pass from one to another, and that it is possible to foresee whether a visual phenomenon, something to be looked at, might not be expressed by music. This variability of the theatrical sign, its ability to change its garb, is its specific property. It enables us to explain the variability of the theatrical structure. And just finally, when he speaks about action, he talks about all that unifies the word, the actor, the costume, the scenery or scenography, and music in the sense that we recognize them as different conductors, and he uses the kind of technical term from electrics, of a single current that flows through them all, either passing from one to another or flowing through a combination of many. Dramatic action is not always concentrated in the actors acting alone. So we are not only talking about the actor and a backdrop, but it is an interplay of all these components. Theatricality is frequently generated precisely through overcoming the resistance caused by some theatrical devices, special theatrical effects in which action is concentrated, for instance, solely on the words or in the actor's movement or in offstage sound and so on. And in the same way, and I find this as a beautiful metaphor, that a tungsten filament glows because it is offering resistance to an electric current. And I love the idea of different components of performance coming to light because they are involved in the action and carry the action. And I'll hand over now to David for a short interlude about the practice that was underpinning Burian's observations.
Thank you, Pavel. Well, we see at least a glimpse of the photo, which would help us. I just wanted, after Pavel's extensive talk about theory, give you at least a little glimpse into another glimpse to theatrical practice. This just few photos from Spring Awakening, famous controversial play by Frank Wedekind, directed by Burian, and stenographer was Miroslav Kouřil. The trick is that they have been in Czech context first to try to combine live action and projection on stage. What we are seeing here.
Could we dim the lights a little bit, please?
Yes. What we are seeing here, it's one of the scenes when one of the characters is like lying on the meadow reading a book. But how Burian was working, he was having proscenium arc covered by semi-transparent foil, and he was projecting photos on this foil. So behind the screen, I would say. There was live action in spotlight, and it combined with the projected image. So he was exactly playing with fragments combined together, so really multimedia fragmentation, which enabled him to tell the story in a very metaphoric way, in very abstract way. For example, and he was also playing around with combining live action together with photos. This is one of the photos showing a professor in gymnasium speaking to his students, having extremely long monologue. And the simple trick was that first there was just one face of the teacher, and then it slowly tripled. So there was more and more of the professors speaking to the students. This could be like grotesque trick, but there could be also a poetic moment. If you remember the play, there is a moment when one of the girls dies after illegal interruption. Abortion, sorry. And with the girl, there is a visual motif of the flower of the white rose connected. It appears 2 times as in the footage, I would say. First in the moment of sexual intercourse, kind of a rape, whatever happens in the play. This is the first moment when the projection of the wild rose appears, like blossoming. And for the second time, it appears in the moment of her death. It again blossoms and it starts bleeding. And this is the way how in projection, in very quick metaphoric image, Burian retells the story and the life of the girl. The ironic moment comes later, because then there is a cut to a photo of the graveyard, and then another cut to the statistics of girls dying because of abortion. So this is the way how he narrates the story using all the multimedia. And the last image is the closing scene of the play, where you could see parents of the boy who kind of raped the girl and who is sent to prison, and his parents are discussing how does this terrible thing come, and of course they are completely unaware of their role in education, and they are just completely ignorant. But what we see on the projection is the face of the girl, and this was not a static photo, this was a film which slowly went for even bigger detail. So just imagine you are sitting in the theater watching the 2 actors, and the face of the girl is getting nearer and nearer, and the last thing in the performance you see are her set eyes of that girl, which are combined with the action of the 2 actors. So this is just one of the samples, but I think very nice sample how multimedia work in Czech avant-garde theater, exactly referencing to Burian's and Honzl's and Mukařovský's idea about rhythm, about metaphor and functionality. So this was just, give you a few images to rest before we move to more textual part. Oh, well, bit of theory again. So yes, space for Šárka.
Okay, thank you, David. I will be talking about Vladimír Jindra, one of the founders of the PQ, so one of the people who caused we are here today. And forgive me, I will read my contribution for coherence. So, Vladimír Jindra was theoretician and was Czechoslovak or Czech theoretician, and he tried to conceptualize the historical and contemporary ways of designing the stage. He analyzed the history of the development of visual elements and their changing role in theatrical performance. The analysis of the artistic practice of Adolf Appia, Edward Gordon Craig, and Stanislavski especially, and also what is very important for us, so-called Trösterian Svobodian artistic practice allowed Jindra to formulate an innovative approach to the history of scenography and to devise a groundbreaking taxonomy of scenography. A taxonomy and theoretical approach that is worth mentioning even today. his specificity of scenography, specifičnost scénografie, a volume of essays, was published posthumously by Theatre Institute in Prague in 1983. However, Jindra developed his approach to scenography earlier and wrote his treatises during the foregoing years, reflecting up-to-date Czechoslovak staging practice. His approach was rooted in the tradition of Czech structuralism, mainly following the works of Jan Mukařovský and Otakar Zich. However, Jindra, as a member of the younger generation of Czech structuralist thinkers, criticizes the reductive understanding of one of the key notions of structuralism, which is component, složka in Czech. And in doing so, he further elaborated Zich's and Mukařovský's ideas of the concept. Zich was the first to introduce the specific character of theatrical unity as the combination of, I quote, two simultaneous, inseparable and clear-cut components that are heterogeneous, that is, visual or optical components and audible acoustic components, end of quote. Zich derives these components from poetry and fine arts. Jindra follows Mukařovský's view, however, which emphasizes the ability of different kinds of arts to integrate. At the beginning of his writing, Jindra seems to favor Mukařovský's idea of components consisting of subcomponents, but later, further in his text, he eventually refuses the notion. In this context, it is worth mentioning that Jindra's analysis of the components and their functions in theatrical performance helps him to bring out a brand new understanding of the visual aspect of performance. Being familiar with and examining the works of Vlastislav Hofman, and especially scenographic works of František Tröster and Josef Svoboda, Jindra articulates the specificity of scenography. He also speaks of the understanding of scenography as a more complex discipline compared to how it was discussed by his predecessors, equating it with stage design. Following Otakar Zich's ideas, Jindra differs scene from stage. He understood stage as a solid base. I quote again, "The stage in its ideally perfect form is an inner space limited by the structure of the theater. Overall, it is signless. The scene, however, is a fictitious space depicting or suggesting real space," end of quote. Further, the approach is also differentiates dramatic space from scene. Dramatic space comes into the existence in time by gradual changes of space-time relations between the actor and the scene. Jindra emphasizes Zich's and Mukařovský's concept of dramatic scene as a force field with lines of force and motoric tracks, motorické dráhy in Czech, that changes under the influence of shape and power of different components. Along with this approach to components, their relations and functions in the theatrical performance, Jindra based his understanding of scenography on analysis of the different approaches to designing the stage connected to the historical epochs of theater and also of scenography. So he introduced special taxonomy with distinguished and defined 4 fundamental stages of development of approaches toward visual elements in performative arts. These 4 are decoration, dekorace, stage design, in Czech jevištní výtvarnictví, scenic design, scénické výtvarnictví, and scenography. So just briefly, what is it? Decoration is based on the decoration on or embellishment of the objects or space in the broad sense of the word. The stage is designed or decorated in a way not so different from decorating an object or space in everyday common life. It has no connection to the structure, function, or structural characteristic of the material which should be expressed. Its only purpose is to cover the connections and to make the object look aesthetical and maybe fashionable. It can be characterized as something additional, passive or artificial. It is based on stereotypical, conventional depictions of setting. It has no connection, according to Jindra, to the dramatic action, and it only brings false, superficial effects. An example of decoration can be the painted stage that is invariable, changeless. As Jindra puts it, it makes the stage organism a monotype. That is, it highly limits the drama and its development on the stage. The painted sets bring with them the necessity to divide drama into acts to enable changes between the acts and to enable changes of the sets. Thus, it interrupts the evolution of the plot and weakens dramatic tension. So, secondly, stage design can be explained as a special kind of visual art. The only difference from its maternal, as Jindra puts it, that is maternal discipline, that is the original discipline which it is derived from, is in involvement of the theatrical stage. The stage depicts, determines, and restricts the area of its possible creative acts. However, the stage can also be used for other occasions, for example, in non-theatrical productions, gymnastic exhibitions, festivities, political speeches, and so on. So the stage design is dependent on fine arts. It attempts to make a creative act connected closely to a particular dramatic text, but just by using the means of its original or maternal discipline. So this aspect may to some extent limit the creative potential in the sense of dramatic action and the integration of visual elements into the unity of the performance. So the third Jindra's term is scenic design, that is less connected to the dramatic text. It is less dependent on it. It is a part or component of performance which is very well emancipated, equal to other components, including the text, and adequate in creating the synthesis of theatrical performance, or in Zich's terms, dramatic art. It has a high potential to carry dramatic function and to support the dramatic tension and its evolution during a performance. Sorry, I forgot to say that I use the translations introduced by Barbora Příhodová in 2011. Sorry, Baruka. I describe these three of Jindra's categories to introduce the context of the fourth and final one, that is scenography. In providing proper characteristics of the fourth category of Jindra's taxonomy, the scenography, his conception of material and non-material or immaterial subcomponents or components of it is of great importance. Jindra develops these notions in his treatise, and they are vital for the understanding of his thoughts on scenography. The idea is based on the necessity of examining antinomic relations between the components of theatrical art. Following again Zich's and Mukařovský's approach, Jindra emphasizes the dynamic interplay of all the components based on material theatrical means of expression. These are building, machinery, sets, props, and stuff or people. These means of expression serve as a base for immaterial interplay of stage action forces, and he uses Mukařovský's claim that every component of theatrical art contains subcomponents. For example, the subcomponents of the acting component are voice, facial expressions, gestures, movement, costume, and so on. According to Jindra, none of the components except the acting and direction can be understood as essential and absolutely necessary for theater. The direction battles for the unity of all the components. In general, these aspects characterize theater as independent and united artistic work. As Jindra explains, material subcomponents are fixed in a hierarchy. They are strongly connected to aspects of their evolution in history. They are dependent on their material, technical, economical, and organizational definitiveness. The immaterial subcomponents are space, time, movement, rhythm, light, color, and sound. They penetrate all levels and components of theatrical art. Even though the nature and qualities differ, the space, time, movement, rhythm, color, and sound are basic, crucial parts of acting, of dramatic text, of direction, scene, and music. Thus, the immaterial subcomponents penetrate all basic components of theatrical art. Jindra understands the immateriality as a substantial quality of scenography, and this characteristic leads him to ponder on analogies with music or with the nature of ideas and emotions. Jindra classifies the immaterial subcomponents and as constants of the so-called transformation principle. So this is another important term in his theory. This transformation principle is explained on the basis of its distinction from another principle, the principle of mere transposition. So the transformation principle is based on the assumption that immaterial subcomponents are able to integrate, to create a brand new quality altogether. Jindra describes as a mere transposition as a process in which components or elements of performance are derived from their maternal arts without being sufficiently transformed and integrated in the work of art. In this case, the components maintain the characteristics of the art, such as its structure, which they are derived from. Therefore, Jindra argues that by entering into the theatrical art, the elements of visual or fine arts like painting, architecture, sculpture, and others have to be transformed, not merely transposed. The complex of immaterial subcomponents specifies the uniqueness of scenography and of theatrical art. The dramatic qualities are guaranteed by the very fact that these immaterial components, being indivisible, penetrate all components of dramatic art. According to Jindra, this feature cannot be found in any other artistic discipline. Jindra's conception of material and immaterial subcomponents draws more attention to activities interceptable by the senses of the spectator. Today we probably would not agree with the immateriality of some of the components listed by Jindra, for example, space, light, color, maybe even sound and movement. Despite the fact that we cannot draw a clear line between materiality and immateriality, Jindra's attention to components other than material ones, moreover assigning them to different categories, anticipates, for example, the multimodal approach as we can use it today. Especially since we associate Jindra's thinking with Czech theatrical structuralism and semiotics, an interpretation of his idea is now offered with a framework of, for example, conceptual metaphor theory or the notions of multimodality as described, for example, by Karel Brušák, but I will leave it now. And I will go back to Jindra's theory. So according to Jindra's work, modern scenography is in correspondence with some aspect of Renaissance and is also influenced by the reformative, as he calls it, work of Appia, Craig and Stanislavski. Scenography surpasses the options of decoration, stage design and scenic design, since it is based on the integration of three disciplines. These are creation, science and technology. For example, light is an element that connects technology with creation. Jindra argues, interestingly, that the audience witnesses only 20 to 30% of scenographers' creative work. The other parts or elements of their work are and even have to be hidden from the audience side. Scenography must not be reduced to its visual aspect. It cannot be stripped of its inner aspects and aspects of the dramatic art. As an insular discipline, it would lose its value. The specificity of scenography is based on cohesiveness with theatrical art. It is determined by the function it has in the whole of the theatrical art. Overall, the scientific part of scenographer's work Jindra comments on is also worth mentioning. Jindra emphasizes the in-depth analysis of the possible dramatic word or words that has to or have to precede every scenographic creation entering to theater space. Following the philosophy of Hegel, Jindra, when explaining the notion of imagery, obraznost in Czech, points out that the naturalness is not a basis for or the main feature of the art. He emphasizes that the relationship between art and reality, meaning everyday common life, must not follow the way of descriptive realism. Instead of superficial description, the work of scenic designers or future scenographers should deal with the metonymy as its main principle. Jindra argues that the whole can be synthesized in the part. The part is able to stand for a whole. Fragmentalization is replaced by analysis which enables us to express the very nature of the idea or meaning. Reality is only a starting point for scenographer that enables him to create an, as Jindra puts it, an arc of metaphor. Jindra further explains or imagines that via the perspective from above of the arc of metaphor, the artist can express or explain every phenomenon. That it is done from the multiple points of view. It also gives him the opportunity to discover new meanings and relations. The scenographer creates a hyperbola over the reality that touches the idea high above from the reality. And then, as he puts it, from above, it returns back to the earth, filled up with imagery. From the contemplative and conceptual reflection of scenic design, Jindra comes to formulating future tasks of scenography in the 60s or later. The scenic designer or scenographers will not yield to the temptation of plurality of phenomena and the chaos, and will not count on the possible use of geometrical perspective to organize them. They will take only some particular elements of reality and organize them into a brand new, intentionally and newly whole. This whole is not by any of its components clearly and unambiguously bound to everyday life and reality. It expresses an imaginary way the whole of reality. The scenography has to create a representative or illustrative model of the world which has its own laws. And to give some examples, so scenography is not based on mere transposition of elements of reality or from one kind of art to another. Its main principle of creation is transformation. One of the pivotal and most instructive examples can be found in Jindra's explanation of the process of involving architecture and theatrical performance, which Jindra again approaches from the historical point of view. Every time an architectonic object enters the space depicted by picture frame stage, it is specially recreated. First of all, it changes its nature from three-dimensional or architectonic object to two-dimensional picture depicted or displayed in the picture frame of the stage. But most importantly, the specificity of the space into which the object enters causes its structural change. The object or architectonic object is distracted and fragmentalized, and then it is recreated according to dramatic laws, not architectonic or visual arts laws. This applies for realistic tendencies and also for more abstract or metaphorical approaches to designing the stage, to scenography. So Jindra claims he refers to the principle as was used by Stanislavski when he asked for meticulous elaboration of the whole ground plan of the scenic architectonic object on the stage, although only one small part of it was to be displayed on the stage. A similar approach can be observed in František Tröster's scenography that Jindra was examining very often. For example, you can see the very famous instance, Tröster's scenography for the government inspector by Gogol, and you can see the drunk doors, which refers with the special kind of geometry, not the ordinary one, not the common one, not just to the drunkenness, but it creates a metaphor of the corrupted or unstable system or institutions. So, and also for another example can be the scenography for the production of Pavel Božkovec's ballet, The Pied Piper. It is very well remembered for the characters or dancers entering the stage through different apertures or rather mouse hole-like passages and doors. So in both cases, the stage architecture were created following the dramatic principles nor architectonic laws. So Tröster highly elaborated the transformative principles and not architectonic. And his works are even today perceived as groundbreaking in modern scenography. Just briefly conclude. Jindra approaches scenography as a highly complex, even scientific discipline, and interpreting his words, we can say he basically explained scenography as a possible point of view of the performance. So this is just briefly the theory developed by Jindra based on the structuralist approach, and we can now just see Josef Svoboda's scenography for Romeo and Juliet, and we can interpret this application of the thoughts as a viewpoint. For example, if we have an architectonic object like a balcony, so highlighting the balcony just like be floating in the air. So the amplification of the situation takes place by recreating, or not just moving a kind of balcony to the stage, but transforming the notion of the balcony and recreating it in this very specific scenic object, explaining quite complexly the situation. So I will give now word back to David.
I will just sum up and give you last material to thought, because we have been thinking that we should drag you almost to actual theater situation, and we would love to stay local, so we finally brought a sample from Brno. This is from Love from Afar, which was premiered 5 years ago in Brno, in the Janáček Theatre. You might have heard about this opera. It's relatively renowned contemporary opera which started like 15 years ago, directed by Peter Sellers in Salzburg, of Festspiele, I think, and then was performed like 5 times, which for contemporary opera, it's quite much. But what we want to show you here as a just last sample is designed by Jiří Herman, the director, and Tomáš Rusin, the stage designer, which very much works with the ideas we have been speaking about here. The opera, it's chamber opera for only 3 characters. There is a poet. It's based somewhere like in 12th century or something. A poet in France writing poems for his faraway love, living somewhere in Constantinople, and the traveler, which is traveling in between them, and chorus. And in Herman's version, it works the way that really the whole space is shifting all the time to show you the traverse in the time and space of these 2 lovers. This first image is from opening sequence, when he in fact is introducing different elements of stage. And what you see at the moment, it looks a little bit like maybe sailors preparing a ship, which might be one of the references. At the same time, it looks a little bit like a falling angel. In certain moment, they just fall down on the ground. So already in the overture, visually, he is opening up metaphorically all the contents of the opera, which is in fact about like really platonic love, because the end of opera is that Geoffrey, the poet, the main character, finally travels to his lover on the other end of the world, and he dies in her hands. That's the end of the opera. But what is quite striking are the moments how Herman works in space, in architecture, by the images of connection and disconnection. Here you can see all the 3 characters, which in fact never meet in reality of the performance. But this is the moment when the traveler is singing song for the women, which was written by the poet. So he's connected all the 3 characters in one moment, and suddenly this space shifts and showing all the three characters, and the question is where the traveler is standing. He is probably, well, he's definitely on the stage, but in a way he is in both spaces. So we quite clearly see how the dramatic quality of the space is demonstrated in the stage design. And the other important moment was that the chorus in this opera became extremely active, not only taking part as a character in some moments, they are sometimes interacting with the characters, but already in the opera, chorus is not only singing lines, but making different like natural sounds, for example, of the sea, which results in the chorus being almost all the time on the stage, sometimes as a counterpart of the characters, and sometimes, as in this photo, part of the chorus, women, is creating the sea, and the men form, in fact, the ship. So there is almost nothing like a ship in the stage design. It's just chorus changing all the time into different things on stage, which in fact goes very much from the opera itself, because already Sarajevo is doing this fascinating thing, because she always moves from sound to singing and back. And this is finally reflecting in the way how chorus is used. And all these things, in fact, are just summing up, but this would be not fair to Jiří Herman and his quality of art, but all these things, how Herman is conceptual thinking, I hope you can see the traces, how it goes on with the structuralistic and Zich approach, and also how Jindra is defining scenography as this kind of supreme phase of thinking about stage design and, in fact, about directing also. And I think this would be enough for us to contemplate and to give you space for questions. Thank you for your attention.
I think we have time for a few minutes for questions, if there are any. Oh, there is.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. And I was just having a question about you were mentioning the actors like having muscles and be part of the scenery. And I was wondering, as a scenic designer or scenographer, like how well are we expected to know the acting and maybe the acting techniques and all that?
Okay. Thank you very much. This is a great question. And I think this is also one of the topics that we have been discussing over the past few days. I think it was Jane Collins, who was here on the stage, was asking, to what extent do we need to train scenographers in acting, and to what extent do we need to train actors in scenography? Because the way we tend to teach, not always, but the way schools tend to teach individual skills are very much in departments. So you have scenographers who will have their craft, who have their skills, actors who have their craft and have their skills, and lighting designers who have their craft and have their skills. Whereas when you go into present-day modern practice, like this one, Jiří Herman, you as an actor are part of the scenography, and you are scenographically active. And as a scenographer, you count with the human element. So I think there is no easy solution, but for me it is an appeal to schools and teachers to start thinking about ensemble practice, about working on projects where individual creators have a clear overview of what is happening in other departments, rather than splitting the departments into boxes that eventually come together. I wonder.
I would just maybe add 2 points. The quality of the Herman performance, and especially the way he works in chorus, is based on 2 facts. One is that he is also trained as an opera singer and actor, so he is evidently has his own experience with acting. This is one point. And the other is that this performance is done by, he was already directing in Brno for 5 years, and all the time he was training opera chorus to move, which everybody who knows something about opera knows that this is already a challenging moment. And it works here. And the other moment maybe would be that there are stage designers and directors which work really closely together, and they really try out stage design in certain moment of preparation. For example, I think it's Jonas Pappelbaum working with Ostermeyer. They usually do like half a year before the real start of rehearsal, doing tryout, set up of the design to test it with actors, how it possibly works. So it doesn't work just the way that you prepare the sketches and then somebody makes it. So, you know, the idea of like interaction of different components on the level of creating is extremely important in the process of creating the theater performance as such.
Especially in operatic production, I would say.
So yes, the answer is not simple, but from practice we see that those divisions between scenographers and actors are never as clear cut. And we've had one of the keynotes that we had Dušan David Pařízek said he started as an actor, progressing to become a director, and then becoming a scenographer. And yesterday, Elahi said that she was involved in the Iranian Canadian scenographer said that she was involved in a project that had actors working for 9 months on ensemble work that created the shape on in the space. So yes, let's break boundaries.
Any other questions?
There's a question up here.
Hello, thank you. I have a question for clarification. In the concepts section, one side was metaphor and one side was function, which seemed to me in relation to this list that the metaphor is the actual material on stage and the function is what it does in relation to the experience of the viewer. But then later on, I also hear you speak about metaphor in a different way. So I'm a little bit, can you clarify this for me a bit?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. There is a big problem with metaphors, that sometimes what we speak of as metaphor is the vehicle, that is the thing that carries the meaning. And sometimes we use the word metaphor as the tenor, that means the thing that we communicate by. Yeah, to clarify on that distinction, or what I had as a metaphor and function. Function in Honzl's term is what use you give to an object. So if, for instance, you use light, blue light, to convey the idea of night, that's the kind of conventional way. The function is you are using it to portray light, and the blue light is the metaphor for that. Or if an actor sits on this and says, this is a horse, that's the function I'm using this box for, and this becomes the metaphor of the horse by the function that I'm putting to. So that's the distinction. Does that answer? Okay, thank you.
I'm really sorry. I know this was fascinating, and I know we have questions, but we're out of time. I'm so sorry. We have to wrap up. So thank you very much to our speakers again. Please do join them outside of these doors and ask questions and engage in discussion. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.